Welcome to Lesson 11 in Module 213, Physical Disabilities and Personal Care. And in this video, we're going to start transitioning away from talking about different conditions to understanding the values and practices that you'll have to use when supporting individuals with these needs. Now, there's going to be a whole series of videos that I'll link for you on the website that have a better ability to demonstrate the specific physical practices associated with things like peri-care, feeding, lifting and transferring, and hygiene care that I cannot show you easily in this context. But I do want us to start off by reviewing and reminding ourselves about the very important ethical practices and values-oriented practices that should apply to all types of personal care, and not just the kind of care we might describe as intimate care or closed door care. Of course, we want to do these things when we're helping people with bathing, dressing, or toileting. But you might also forget how intrusive it would feel to have somebody start pushing a wheelchair if you wanted to move it yourself, or feeding you when you wanted to do that on your own. So even something as simple as having somebody reach into your personal space and do up your jacket is intrusive if not done with these principles in mind. Ensuring privacy is really one of the most fundamental things that we can do, and that includes being careful about people's medical information. For example, if you're in a public space and you're talking about their medical needs, you don't want to do that in a way that allows others to overhear, or leaving documents where people who are not in a need-to-know position could see them. For example, I've been to homes where people had bowel charts or menstrual charts on the wall of spaces that visitors might see. A pizza guy doesn't need to know when Johnny last had his medicine or when Susie last had her period. Those should be posted in places that are much more private. For example, in a clipboard, in a person's, in a special shelf, or in a binder where only staff people can see it. We must also be aware of body privacy, and we remember that body privacy includes an area that's really a leg's length around our body. Anytime somebody's going into that personal space, they need to make sure they're remembering principles like consent and thinking about whether or not they really are needed in that space. So something like pushing on a person's wheelchair is an intrusion of their body privacy. Think about also that our artifacts, things like wheelchairs, canes, and glasses, are extensions of ourselves. And so if we're grabbing a person's cane, or we're taking somebody's glasses off their face without asking them and wiping them, we really are doing very similar things to touching them without permission. And the same is true of eye contact. Where we look when we're helping people really matters. If you're helping somebody in the bathtub, most of the time you should be having your eyes focused on the person's face. Of course, you'll need to make sure that you inspect and make sure you've got the job done, but we don't want our eyes to be wandering around. We want to naturalize that interaction as much as possible. And we want to make sure we do private things in private spaces. We don't give people medicines in the middle of restaurants or feed them in a big group of people if we can do that in a subtler way. We want to close doors when that's available to us, or use other types of curtains or barriers. So literally, I've been out with my coworkers where we had people stand in front of the activity we were doing to provide a bit of a barrier if we needed to do something like straighten somebody's bra or help them get their nose wiped, just so that they had a little bit more privacy. It's also important to make sure that you have consent before you do any of these procedures. Even for people who are nonverbal, we want to be aware of their body language. If people resist when we're trying to give them some help, then we should think of that as them refusing consent. And a person doesn't just give consent at the beginning of the procedure, they can also refuse consent later on. So we have to be aware of the idea that we should ask for consent every time, even if the person is quite used to us doing this, and we should be aware that consent has to be given throughout the procedure. One of the best things to do is offer people a choice. For example, where do you want this done? Who would you like to help you? Would you like to do it before or after another activity? That sort of thing, or even sometimes, what steps do you like to take, are all examples of choice. Communication and comfort, talking to the person throughout the process, letting them know what you're going to do before you do it, checking on their overall comfort level, their physical comfort level, for example, their body position. Something as simple as a wrinkle underneath a person can cause discomfort after a period of time, or the position of their body, especially if it compromises their ability to breathe or affects their digestion or creates pain. We also want to try and have naturalized conversation with people, being pleasant and genuine. So, for example, if you watched a really interesting hockey game last night, once you finish talking to the person about the what you're doing portion of the communication, then talk to them about things that a person might typically talk about. If they can interact socially, talk about what they're interested in. If not, tell them a little bit about yourself and maintain the comfort and naturalism of that interaction. Be aware of your own hygiene. For example, if you're a smoker, you're going to want to really think about whether or not that's something that's fair to do to other people. So, for example, I have worked with staff who wore specific clothing when they would go down to smoke, and then they would take that jacket off or attire off so that they didn't smell like cigarettes. They brushed their teeth or used some kind of breath mint before they got into people's personal space. And your overall hygiene, whether it's your showering or brushing your teeth, and even things like whether you're wearing perfume or smelly soaps or shampoos, all of those can be intrusive to people. Even the food that you eat, make sure that you're not going and getting really close to people with any kind of strong scent. And of course, it's particularly important that you realize that a lot of the people we're working with are immunocompromised. So having gloves on or washing your hands and using really good universal precautions, and we'll get to that in a subsequent video, is incredibly important. Perhaps the most important word to all this is to think about the dignity of the person, their emotional, social, and spiritual wellness. The opposite of dignity is embarrassment or humiliation. So what are we doing to help people feel good about themselves? And one of the most important things is the principle of least intrusion. We spoke about this a little bit in the module on ethics of touch, helping people to have clear-cut protocols that limit what staff do and that increasingly allow people to do more and more on their own is a really important thing. But even if you're working with somebody who has a progressive condition, getting them to do even the smallest amount for themselves can be a big part of intrusion. Putting your own toothpaste on the toothbrush, or holding it hand over hand instead of having somebody toothbrush for you. Using a tool such as a water pick or electric toothbrush can allow a person to do more for themselves over time. Or using some of the adaptations that a physical or occupational therapist might provide us with. Be aware of boundaries as well. For example, if you can help a person by standing in front of them and helping them hold their hands, it may be a lot better than getting back to chest and right inside of their personal bubble. Also think about quality control. Would you want to use the same tool or the same or consume the same food as what you're serving to somebody else? And this is something I personally have found very disturbing. I've worked in group homes where staff, for example, burnt or overcooked a meal and said, oh, it's no big deal, it's going to get pureed, or that won't matter. It does matter. If you wouldn't eat it, don't serve it. If the toothbrush is too worn out for you or the razor is too worn out for you, don't use it. If the clothing is too dirty for you, don't put it back on the person. So make sure you maintain the same level of quality, if not better, than what you personally would expect. These principles and others apply in general to the work we're going to be doing in any type of personal care. You not only have a responsibility to uphold them yourself, but to be an advocate that they're upheld within the organizations to which you're exposed, including your own organization and others. So be an advocate if you see that this isn't happening. Don't allow people to gradually erode these practices, because it changes the culture where you work and it becomes the new norm. People become really accepting of those low standards. So if you don't aggressively work or persistently work at maintaining these high standards, you'll start to see them erode gradually over time.